All right, it's 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. And the only thing on the agenda is the referendum, and we're just right now checking to make sure nobody's walking up out front. So Trevor will be taking over and giving us our presentation here shortly.
All right, my turn? Okay, guys. Well, as Eric said, we're here tonight to obviously talk about the bond referendum. So I'm going to kind of break it into a couple parts for you guys so we can maybe have a discussion as it's relevant to things. And then that way we're not holding questions maybe all till the end. First thing I'd like to do is talk about the 5 projects that encompass the referendum amount. And then after we talk about those projects, I'll take some questions at that point. So again, either if you're here in person or I believe if you're watching the live stream, you can also submit your questions and then I'll have them here on the tablet. That is great. Okay, and then so then we'll take some questions after that, and then we'll get into the funding overview, the tax impact, and then we'll take any additional questions at that point. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Trevor Huffaker. I'm an architect and one of the partners at EngTech. We're out of Bismarck. We are an engineering and architecture firm, and majority of our work is dealing with K-12 school districts. So I've been involved in about a dozen different projects just like this one throughout the state in the last 5 years. Probably the closest one to here would be the Mont Regent project when they did the new elementary school here about 4 years ago. So I was involved in that project. One of the things that we do on any project that we get involved with is we like to do kind of an assessment early on. And that assessment is completed by our mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and then a structural engineer and myself on the architecture side. And really, we're trying to get a snapshot of what your building looks like. A lot of times there's kind of some needs that might come up, and we want to make sure that we're not going to put you in a position that you've got something failing 2 years down the road and we didn't address that. In this particular instance, we did a really high level assessment because there had been a kind of a major building project about 5 years ago. So we kind of did a visual assessment of the building. We came up with a list of probably 14 or 15 different items that we thought should be considered. Some of them, all of the ones that you'll see tonight were on that list. And then some of them were just simple wear and tear things, carpeting, ceiling tiles, paint, things like that. And those are typically annual maintenance things, unless you would choose to do everything at once. Obviously, it's going to be a big cost. So what came out of that was that we didn't see anything, structurally deficient with the building in terms of the student capacity. We didn't see any issues of overcrowding or not enough space. So for those reasons, we didn't feel that a building replacement was really warranted in this instance. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on. So why are we here? What really started this whole project is about a year ago, one of the boilers at the high school overheated and short of starting on fire, it basically was disabled. And that's really what got this whole thing kick-started. Fortunately, the district was able to get that boiler repaired, but it was a very temporary solution. It's not a long-term fix. If you're familiar with the facilities, the building that we're in here right now is actually the oldest building. This is 1950. As you go down and turn the corner, that's 1954, and then the high school was built in 1966. So we're dealing with 55 to 70-year-old buildings here. Again, comparatively to a lot of the districts I work with, your buildings are in good condition. So that's a good thing. But we do have a lot of original equipment that we're working with as well. As I mentioned, there was that building project about 5 years ago, and there were a lot of things that were done in that project. And if you guys got some handouts tonight, or if you're live streaming online, these are available on the website. There's 2 different documents here. One of them is a frequently asked questions, and that's kind of a 3-page document, and it captures a lot of the discussion a little bit more in detail. And I'll reference that a few times tonight. And then the other one is what I call a fact sheet. So again, it's a high-level overview of some of these projects. So if you got questions, these are really a good reference tool to start with, and I'll use these quite a bit as we go through tonight. But that project 5 years ago, let me see here, I think it's right here, it's on the first page. It covered things like, it was an energy efficiency project. So it covered items like replacing air handlers. I believe there's a couple up on the stage. Unit ventilators in the classrooms, that's what supplies and conditions the air. Steam and condensate piping for those units to make sure they're working properly. Direct digital controls. That means you can pull up the computer, on a computer, you can pull up the HVAC systems and control the set points and monitor your systems digitally. So it was using a pneumatic system, which is pretty antiquated before. Let me see here. LED lights, much like you see here in the gym. Pool dehumidification system, and then it did some other energy projects on the outside. I know they replaced the roofing on the high school. So they did a lot for that project, and I think the important thing to know is that, my understanding, I wasn't involved in that project, but my understanding is taxes weren't raised to do that project. So the district was able to work within some of the existing levies, and we'll talk about those in a second, to accomplish that project. However, there were some things that it didn't capture either. There were things like the roofing that we're going to be talking about today, and the boilers. Those were some things that were noted on a list saying, hey, you should really consider these. But at the time, the team that did the assessment felt that they had 5 or more years left on them, and so for that reason, based on the cost, it would have, they would have had to go to other funding sources. They felt that that was best just to wait on that one. So again, we're at 5 years, and that's kind of where we're sitting. Okay, so I'm going to run through these projects: boilers, windows, building envelope, roof, and the pool. So here we've got the high school boilers. Again, I'm an architect, not a mechanical engineer. I know enough to be dangerous, and I've been in this room a few times. These are the 2 original 1955 coal-fired hydronic or water boilers. These control the high school units. And I believe the one on the left here is the one that actually was the one that failed. So one of the things to note about the coal system, and I'll show you here real quick. Here's the elementary. That's just right behind the gym where we're standing. That's the building outside, right here. So these are 2 boilers. These are actually steam-fired boilers. They use coal to make steam and actually run the piping through the building. And in the last number of years, there's been a lot more steam breaks, condensate trap breaks. It's just been a lot of maintenance on that system. The other thing, as I understand it, in order to keep these running, somebody has to check on that coal to make sure it's feeding those systems every 3 to 4 hours, 24 hours a day, as long as that heating system's running. So something to keep in mind as we're talking about that. So essentially what we've kind of determined is that, hey, 55 years old, these are well beyond their useful life. You've done a great job getting what you've gotten out of them. A lot of maintenance, and then obviously the steam and water. So our proposed solution is to actually replace the boilers, and we've been talking with MDU about bringing in a propane service line to the building. So you would actually be running on a fuel source that it doesn't require any maintenance personnel to monitor that system. It also offers a lot higher efficiency than the coal does. And one of the things that we haven't studied it, or we've talked about it at a high level, but we're actually going to, if the referendum passes, as one of our first tasks at hand, is going to see if we can actually take the entire physical plant of the building and get it on serve it off of 2 boilers instead of 4. So it would require some replacement of some interior equipment, but if it turns out that it's cheaper or the same cost, it would be best for the long run, because you'd only be servicing 2 boilers annually instead of 4. And then again, thinking 20, 25 years down the road, you're probably not going to get 55 years out of a boiler that's manufactured today. So 25 years down the road, you're only replacing maybe 2 boilers instead of 4. So we don't know if that's going to happen yet, but that's something we do want to look at as far as a cost savings. Okay, windows, doesn't go without me saying, these are actually right behind here, the ones we're looking at. Again, original to 1950 in this instance. These are over at the high school. So we're looking at all the windows in the building that are windows in the buildings that are original. It's primarily the north side of the buildings. We'd like to get those replaced. Again, energy efficiency on the main piece there. So Not a real fancy project, but again, in terms of it will help the overall efficiency of the building and the life cycle cost. The other thing, again, when I look at buildings, I look at a lot of different things and I key in on little things like this. So, here's where the electrical service comes into the building, actually right over here on the stage. And when I can see foam and I can see birds nesting in there, to me, that's like, hey, we need to get this fixed because, water gets in there, air's getting in there. We want to protect that envelope, and then the interior of the building will pretty much stay in good shape. So again, lots of little instances like that around the building. So it's going to be my job if this referendum passes is to walk around this building and detail out every little area where we've got joint sealant, hole in the building, painting. We want to get that envelope nice and refreshed. The other thing I would say about this project is, again, if this project goes forward, our team not only works on the design drawings, we also assist with the bidding, and then we actually provide construction oversight. So any contractors who are here doing work, our firm would actually make sure that they're doing the project to the specs that we did and making sure that it's done before they all walk away. Otherwise, they don't get paid. So essentially, stuff like this doesn't happen when we walk away. So there's some assurance to the district from that perspective. So again, just typical wear and tear around the building. We just want to get those things cleaned up. Again, another one of the projects is roofing. So the gym here has a newer shingle roof, and the high school has new roofing, but the elementary building, it has this metal roof on it, which is most likely over the original roof that was put on. There have been a number of leaks in the buildings. We're missing gutters. Just a lot of maintenance things that need to be addressed here. So essentially we're talking from kind of that white line to the south, and then including the two-story building with the metal on it. All that would get removed and replaced. So it's leaking. There's inadequate insulation. Again, energy code standards and what's required for insulation's changed since 1960. So we're going to recommend a full replacement on that. Bring back insulation, new membrane system, fully warranted, at least a minimum of 20 years, but if we can look at 20 or 25-year options if the board's interested. So usually just costs a little bit more money. And then lastly, the pool. And honestly, this is one that's probably held this conversation that we're having tonight up the most, because there's been, who's responsible for it? Is it the city? Is it the school? But ultimately, where we're at is the school has stepped up and said, hey, we're going to take care of this. And so the issues that we're facing with the pool, again, it's a 55-year-old facility. It's a concrete shell. It's cracked. It's got piping that's under the concrete slab. And over time, those have just deteriorated, and there's a lot of water loss in the building. I know when we were just talking as we were preparing for this, in comparing water bills from right now to when the pool is operating, it's about a $4,000 a month difference. So just think about that cost savings on an annual basis, if this were to be repaired. We did look at there was an option before we got involved to actually put a pool liner in there and fix some of the drains to bring it up to code. And that project was between about $400,000 and $500,000 just to do basic minimum repairs. And because we weren't going to replace, or because the company wasn't going to replace the under slab piping, there's no guarantees that it was going to work. So again, that's kind of what made us kind of take a pause, step back, and have those conversations with the city and say, okay, what is best? What's best for the community? So again, our proposed solution is going to be replace the entire build, basically everything inside that shell, the concrete down, all be dug out and rebuilt a fully functioning system. Some of the good things is that pool dehumidification system that's in there is new. So we've got some new HVAC. The pumps and the filters and a lot of that have been replaced in the last 10 years. So the pool company that does the maintenance, they feel that what you have is in good shape. So we're able to reuse a lot of that into the project as well. Two other little benefits here to the project that we've got included is that we're going to put on an exterior entrance vestibule that'll come right off of that concrete pad and go right into the gym, or sorry, into the pool. So that way, depending on how the board and the city if we want to adjust those hours or maybe increase the availability of it, now you've got a way to access that and have the school still secure while you can have that available. And then there's been discussion about creating a splash pad feature. Again, kind of helps make that pool a little bit more viable. So this isn't a rendering of the pool, but I'll show you here. This is actually, it's a little bright. This is actually kind of a similar facility that we thought, hey, if we can make this happen, and the pool consultant that did the pricing says they think this is possible. This is kind of what we could envision is essentially you'd have 1 to 3 lap lanes just like you do now. Take a portion of that pool and actually create a little splash pad. That's a 0 depth entry. There's no water. You could be in a wheelchair. You could be a kid. You could be a senior citizen. Anybody can use that. And then we'd still have a diving well feature. This particular pool doesn't. But let's just kind of give you an idea of what we're hoping if the referendum were to pass. This is kind of what we're thinking that we're going to try to achieve with that. So there's a lot to cover, but I'll stop right there and maybe take some questions, and I'll check the iPad here and anything from our live people. No questions? Right. Okay. So I'll repeat it just so everybody online can hear. So the first question was basically, was EngTech involved in that original project that was done 5 years ago? And the answer to that's no. A company by the name of CTS was involved in that. And so CTS did the full assessment. They made recommendations. The board at that time said, hey, we want to do these things for that amount. And yeah, you're right. So a large part of the HVAC portion of that was in the elementary, and they replaced a lot of the steam piping and the terminal units in the classrooms. So those are relatively new. The second question was just clarifying the boilers, where they're at and how many. So right now there's 2 boilers that serve the elementary, that serve the gym and the elementary portion, and those are steam boilers. And then there's 2 additional boilers that run the high school. And so they don't, if you were to lose the 2 boilers here, the elementary, there's no way to heat the elementary, and vice versa. If the 2 boilers go down in the high school, there's no way to heat that. The project that I was mentioning is we were actually going to look at the cost to replace, we'd have to replace some of the parts and pieces on those units that were just put in 5 years ago if we were to go from coal to propane, or I should say if we go from steam to water. But again, we're looking at the cost saving side and the long-term benefits. So if it pans out, then that'll be a recommendation that we would make. If it doesn't pan out, then we would likely just replace the 2 boilers. We'd replace all 4 in that instance. More on the high school on the windows. So the windows that be replaced are primarily on the high school side. As far as the temperature issues, I'm not sure on that. Yeah, I mean, if you've seen, we haven't had a lot of snow, but I know when it did snow back in October when I was here, I mean, there was some pretty big, there was a lot of melting going on there. So there is a lot of loss going through the roof for sure. I think that'll help. But a part of it could go back to the controls if they're depending on what they're dialed in at, or I'm not sure how the system's being run. So, okay. Yeah, he just replaced those here in the last few months. Okay, other questions? Otherwise, I don't see anything here other than I need to move closer to the mic. So I'll try and stay up here. All right, let's get to the fun part, right? So I thought I'd take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about school finance basics. I do this a lot, and for me, it's still a little bit, it can be a little confusing at times to talk about it. So I put together a little cheat sheet for myself here. So basically, the district, to boil it down, the district has several different mechanisms to pay for improvements to buildings. Let me go to this here real quick. So when the school collects taxes, or collects taxes, a lot of that goes into the general fund. And that's the big bucket, right? And it's important to understand that the general fund pays for teacher salaries and benefits. It pays for books, it pays for student services, it pays for a lot of things. And so when you do projects, if you start pulling from that general fund, you're now you're potentially sacrificing education. But that's a fund that oftentimes you can take money out of. And I think there's a cap on that, if I'm not mistaken. Is it 70 mils or something? The general fund. Some of these have caps on them. Again, that's where I kind of draw the line as far as me being an expert on school finance. But there are some other funds, and I've got them listed here. So we've got, I'll just read them off here: miscellaneous, fund levy, special reserve, special assessment, limited tax, and lease revenue bonds. So these are all additional ways that the school board can finance different projects. And each one of these has certain things that it can be used for. But the school district can use these different, they can levy taxes on these different buckets without asking you guys for permission. Essentially, they're going to say, hey, we need money for buses, so we're going to increase this, or they just adjust it, right? And they don't have to ask. I will note that there's one right down here on the bottom that says lease revenue bonds. So school districts per the North Dakota Century Code can actually borrow money up to I think it's up to $4 million without asking the patrons for a vote. But in order to do that, they would have to use that lease revenue bond, and the payment that would have to be made comes out of the general fund. So as I was mentioning before, that general fund, you want to make as much of it go to student services, teachers and staff, things like that. So you don't really want to use something that's going to be a detriment to that. So in this particular instance tonight, that really was never an option of saying, hey, let's just approve the project and move forward. So that's what gets me to my next slide here. So there's two methods in which the school district or school board can basically levy taxes. But they require a vote of the patrons, of the school patrons. The first one's the building fund levy. This is a levy that requires a 60% vote, and it can be up to 20 mils, and there's no sunset. So in the instance of Hettinger, at some point in the past, I don't know the exact year, the voters said, hey, we're going to approve up to 10, and it's 10 as long as it could be 10 forever. It doesn't mean that the school board has to levy 10. They could levy 0 against it, but they could levy up to 10. And they don't have to go back and ask. Now, if they wanted to raise it to 20, they would have to have a vote. The important thing to note here is that right now, that building fund levy is being used to pay for that project 5 years ago. So that project, when they borrowed the money for that, they're actually paying for that payment's being made out of this fund. So it's already being maxed out. So there's really nowhere to go. There's nothing that we can borrow against that. Which takes us to our last one, and that's the sinking and interest fund. So essentially that's a fancy word of saying a bond referendum. And so again, this is an instance where the district can borrow money up to 5% of the school's valuation. So the school's valuation is roughly $150 million. 5% of that is $7.5 million. So the school district can't be in debt more than $7.5 million, again, assuming it's voter approved. There is one exception to that. You can take it to 10%, but it requires a second vote. So the first vote requires 60% supermajority of the total votes cast, right, for that bond referendum to pass. And that's what we're talking about here tonight for the February 16th vote. if the district needed to exceed that, for instance, say you had a $10 million project, you can only do 7.5 without, or you'd have to go to that second question. In order to do the second question, you've got to get 50% approval. And we're not asking that tonight. We're only asking for 3.3 million of that 7.5 total that the district could ask for. So I'm going to kind of, actually a couple things here. So when we talk about the payment that's going to be required for a $3.3 million referendum, the school district's been working with PFM. They're a financial advisor that work with school districts all throughout the state to make sure that everything's done per century code. And right now they're seeing bond sales at 1.25 to 1.5%. So she said actually there was one point in time here a few months ago where it was lower, but this is literally historic all-time lows that we're looking at. A lot of the referendums that I've been involved with, it's been 2-3% loans, and that's where the Bank of North Dakota actually has a school construction fund that they'll buy that loan for 2%. So the benefit here for the district is that if this passes, we're going to get you'd get an ultra low interest rate. If not, you've kind of got that insurance that the Bank of North Dakota, provided they still have funding in that from the last legislative session, there would be an opportunity to max that out at 2%. So the one thing I thought I'd just add here real quick, because I think I've heard there's maybe some questions about this, is why don't we just look at doing a brand new school? So I mean, I've kind of said, hey, we didn't really think it was warranted based on capacity, based on current condition, based on a handful of things. We didn't feel that that was what you guys really needed. The other piece of that is when I was talking about that debt limit, the district can only borrow $15 million maximum, and that's if all the voters approved it in order to do that. A new school to replace something, you wouldn't probably need a facility as large as what you have today, but you would need at least 80,000 square feet, because I've done the same thing for 4 other K-12 schools. You'd be looking at about a $22 to $25 million project at a minimum. So financially, there's no possible way without a very large donation to the school district that you would be able to actually afford a brand new school. So again, not something we looked at as part of the project, but just in case it's a question in somebody's mind, hey, why aren't we building new? Quite frankly, you just can't afford it. It's not possible. I might actually pause there because that was a lot of information. Are there questions on these levies? I'll get into the details of this particular situation, but that's kind of a lot of information. Right, yeah, so my understanding is that the last project that was done was right around $4.2 million. And again, that project didn't have to go to a vote because they were able to use the building fund levy. I believe they might have used the special miscellaneous levy. And then there's also some grants and some rebates and some energy savings costs that paid for that project. So it used all the levies that the district could use without raising taxes. They pretty much used that to make that project happen. Now that indebtedness does go against this project. So since there's about $3.6 million still on that loan, we would actually be capped on our project at like 4 because we can't exceed that 7.5% debt limit for the district. Let me see here. I think I saw a question. How old is the school and how old is the boilers? So I'll just recap that for the person who asked that. So our schools, the elementary is built in 1950, 1954, and the high school is built in 1966. And the high school has the original boilers. The boilers in the elementary were purchased about 20 years ago, and they were about 20 years old. They were bought used. Okay, so they replaced, obviously, they replaced something. I'm not familiar with what that was. So you're dealing with about 40-year-old boilers over here. Okay, well, you cannot read that because I cannot read that. But this is basically what the ballot says. So when you guys go and vote on the 16th of February, this is the exact ballot you're going to see. if you have the frequently asked questions, I've got that same thing on the third page at the top left, so you can read it there. I do have a little blow up here. This is what it looks like if you blow it up. So basically, without reading it verbatim, there's a couple things I want to point out in here, and I'll move into the next slide. But the important thing in here is that you're going to see in the middle it says that you're going to do bonds not to exceed 3.3 million. So the district, if this project came in under budget, they could choose to actually issue less bonds. They just can't issue more. It's a 20-year note, and it's going to require $14.01 per 1,000 of taxable valuation. And so I've got some examples to explain what taxable valuation is. Because if you use the wrong number, you get a very different tax impact. So as I just kind of mentioned, $3.3 million maximum, so 20-year loan. I think actually this is a 19-year loan because of where we're at. We didn't make the vote before October 1st, so we can't levy against that last year's taxes. So I think we're actually 19 years. It's a fixed rate loan, again, to be determined when the bond sales happen. Currently right now in that 1.5% range. And it can be paid off early. So it's something if the district wanted to pay that off early, that would be an option. It requires an additional 14.01 mils. And so mills, if you're not familiar with mills, that's how the county, that's how the state, that's how everybody collects taxes. It's based, that's 1/1000th of a number, right? So in this instance, 1 mil for Hettinger Public Schools, because the district valuation is 150 million, 1 mil is $15,338. That's how much 1 mil equals. And so our annual payment on a $3.3 million loan is $214,935. So if you take that annual loan, $214,935, and you divide it by a mil, that's how you get that 14.01 mil increase. So it's just the mills pay, the mills basically make our loan payment. Okay, sorry. Got ahead of myself here. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, taxable valuation is what the ballot says. That's what your taxes, the increase is based on your taxable valuation. And essentially what the state does is they have a formula that takes the true and full value of your property, and it varies. If it's a residential property, they take 9% of that. If it's commercial or ag, they figured on 10% of that valuation. So for an example here, if you had a $100,000 house, it gets automatically assessed. If it's a house, it's assessed at 50% of that value. And then they take 9% of that, and that's what creates your taxable value. So you don't really have to know that if you have your tax statement. It's pretty much done for you, and I'll show you an example here in a second. So this financial overview that you're looking at here, this is actually on the back of that fact sheet that is handed out. It's on the website. Essentially what this is intended to be is just a really high level overview. If you just want a general range, hey, you know, I know I bought my house for $100,000, so I'm probably going to be in this range. It just helps get you, it shows you at a really quick glance of what your estimated annual and monthly tax impact would be. But what I would recommend is that I would recommend you actually go look at your tax statement. That's going to be the best thing to do. If you have questions, obviously if you're in Adams County, call the Adams County auditor. If you happen to be on the Hettinger County side, call the auditor there, and they'll be happy to help you pull your tax statement up and help you look through that. One of the other things that we did is we put a tax calculator on the school's website. So if you have that tax statement, you can actually go punch the number in there, and it'll tell you, it'll basically kick these same numbers out for you so that you can see that. Let's see if I got any questions. Good. Okay, so again, this one's a little hard to read. I have a blow up. Essentially, I took an example of an Adams County tax statement from this last year. And so again, looking at the entire statement, there's a lot of different stuff going on here, but you'll see here, if I zoom in, there's two numbers. So if you go, it'll say true and full value, and it'll have a number. Obviously, we want to use the 2020 number. And then right below, it's that taxable value. So if you took that 78,000 and you took it times the 50% and then took it times the 9, which is basically 4.5%, that's how you come up with taxable valuation. That's how the county figures it out. Again, as I mentioned, I recommend just focusing on that taxable value because that's what the ballot says, $14.01 per thousand of taxable value. So in this particular instance, this house on this statement has a true and full $78,000. It has a taxable value of $3,510. So on a $78,000 house, it's about a $49.49 a year increase. So it ends up being like $3 a month or so, $4 a month. All right, we're almost done here. So I thought I'd give you a quick idea of the timeline, and then I'll take some questions. Essentially, right now, we're here tonight at the first public meeting. We're going to do another one of these public meetings, exact same format, exact same presentation, provided we don't get some questions here that we may end up adding into that just to maybe clarify that for the next round. But we are going to have another meeting on February 10th, 6 p.m. here at the gym again. Voting day is on the 16th of February, and you can vote at the Armory from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. If you do need absentee ballots, you need to call the school here and talk to the business manager. There are some instructions. Again, on the frequently asked questions, there's a section on the second page called voting. It tells you who's eligible to vote. It tells you if you need to get an absentee ballot, when to vote. It tells you where to vote. So we try to get all the information kind of in this one document for you. So if the referendum passes, if we get 60%, at that point, the district would most likely choose to move forward. And then at that point, we would then begin designing and bidding the documents. So at this point, the only thing we've done is it's been visual. We've done some cost estimates. We have not done any design drawings at this point in time. Sure. Okay. So again, with any referendum, the North Dakota Century Code requires that it achieves a 60% voter approval. And so that is 60% of the total votes that come in. So if we get 100 votes, we need 60, actually you need 61. So 60% plus 1 is usually what we like to get. And again, absentee ballots, I just want to say the important thing there is if you are doing an absentee ballot, it needs to be either hand delivered to the school or postmarked no later than the day before the election. So if you send it on the day of the election, it will not count. It has to be postmarked on the 15th, otherwise it does not count. So again, I mentioned design and bidding. Obviously, just where we're at in the season, we're on the tail end. We want to get things moving quickly so we can get some competitive bids. And then obviously, the first priority is to get the boilers replaced prior to the next heating season. So a project like this size, I'm thinking that's probably going to take us right up till October, right till we need to turn them on pretty much. Windows and roofs should be able to happen relatively easily with no issue. And then, so I kind of see a May to September timeframe on those projects. And at this point, the pool is still a little bit up in the air. There's still some discussion that needs to be had about what it's going to look like, what it's going to be, what it's going to have. So I anticipate that construction is going to go probably through winter of this year at a minimum. So with that, I will take more questions. Nothing online yet. Yeah, go ahead. Right. Okay, so the question was basically what's ENGTech's involvement during construction? Do we oversee things and where we kind of draw those lines? So our responsibility is basically our contract would be with the school district. So we basically are your advocate. These projects are all going to be publicly bid. So we'll follow the Century Code as far as taking bids. In this particular instance, we have no control over who's going to bid or what bid we get or the quality of the contractor that we get. We do try and follow up on those. So if we get a contractor and, if the district has had a bad experience with that contractor, or we can basically say, hey, they're not qualified, then in that instance, we may be able to, look at the alternative options. But for the most part, we take low bid. And so that's where ENGTech will actually, we'll be on site like every 2 weeks, and we have meetings with the contractor. Gives us an opportunity to go walk through, check on progress. During that construction progress, we actually get documentation from the contractor saying, hey, this is the boiler that we're installing. So we check all that, make sure it's the right model, the right size. We oversee all that. And then when it actually gets built, I mean, technically they're responsible for means and methods to get it installed. We just check to make sure that it was the right product and that it was installed the way that we designed it. And so we're kind of that quality control check for the district to make sure that you're getting what you paid for and that it operates functionally when you walk away. And we do have 11-month warranty walkthrough. So all work will have a 1-year warranty as far as workmanship. I mean, obviously the products are going to have 10, 20, or whatever the warranty product is for that. But we do come back at 11 months and make sure, hey, is everything still working like it's supposed to? And if something's glitching between then, we take care of it. So, or we help facilitate taking care of it, I should say. Okay, there was a question online. It said, could you talk about possible city funding? Is that a commitment or year to year? You want to take that one? I'm guessing that's regarding the pool. Regarding the pool,
The question was concerning the pool funding, and we have had a commitment from the city at $40,000 a year to help us fund the operation of it. And that was contingent on us building it for the community.
Yes.
Okay, the question was, is the $40,000 to help repay the bond payment or where? And I guess the $40,000 a year is to help us operate and maintain that pool. So we can use this bond to build the pool, but we can't use it to maintain it. That money would have to come out of our education and our general funding, which is paying for our teachers, et cetera. So we asked for that support from the city to take that money, instead of taking out like we have been in the past of our general fund, to help us maintain chemicals, water, et cetera. Well, we have a rough time saying we're looking at 5,000 to 6,000. We don't really know on the cost because how many years have we been leaking water? We were looking at $4,000 a month in water loss possibly. So it's hard to go back and say at what point were we losing $2,000 worth, $3,000. But if we're looking at a $5,000 to $6,000, it's a guess of what our expenses are a month. But like I said, this is kind of a guess because we've had such expense with the pool.
Other questions? Okay, I just had one come in here. It says, why do the minutes of the city council say the 40,000 per year is only for 5 years and then reevaluate?
They were just going to reevaluate the situation on where their funding was going to come from amongst their own board. Is to reevaluate what they committed.
Other questions here? Yeah, again, if you have questions on your tax situation, I mean, again, if you have your tax statement, great, consult that first. Call the auditor if you've got questions, voting questions, you can reach out to Heather here at the school on that. Calculators on the website, the fact sheet and the FAQ are on the website. Following tonight's meeting, we're going to get this PowerPoint put up on the website as well. So if you've got questions, you can go back and filter those way through there. As far as if you've got other questions, I believe all the board members' phone numbers are on that the frequently asked questions. So you can definitely reach out to them. They'll be happy to take your call. And again, as we get questions, we're going to try and update that frequently asked questions just to make sure that we're kind of getting a good snapshot. Somebody's asking a question, somebody else is probably thinking it. So we want to make sure we get that answered. So with that, I have nothing else. If nobody else has any other questions.
I'd like to thank everybody who logged online and came to the meeting, and thank Trevor for everything he's done, and just encourage people to reach out with questions. Like you said, our numbers are there, and that's why we're on the board. Just give us a call or send us an email or whatever you need to do. Since there's no further questions, if anybody doesn't have any, I need a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.